You know what they say about humans in space? We're the galaxy's favorite accident waiting to happen. Case in point, Jake Martinez, maintenance worker extraordinaire aboard the galactic prison transport ship Mercy's End. And when I say extraordinaire, I mean he was extraordinarily good at being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jake was your typical human average height, brown hair that never quite stayed where it was supposed to, and that particular brand of stubborn optimism that made other species shake their heads in bewilderment. He'd been working maintenance on alien ships for 3 years, mostly because human engineering somehow made sense to broken alien technology. Go figure. The crew of Mercy's End was, shall we say, a mixed bag of galactic misfits. Captain Vorthak was a 7-foot-tall Zolonian who treated every minor inconvenience like a Shakespearean tragedy. His purple skin would flush darker whenever he had to deal with what he called excessive dramatics, which was rich coming from someone who announced breakfast like he was declaring war. Then there was Engineer Clixon, a jittery pixelite whose 6 arms were constantly twitching with nervous energy. Clixon treated every mechanical problem like it might explode at any moment, which to be fair, on his watch they usually did. His translucent blue skin would literally flicker when he got anxious, turning him into a living anxiety lamp. And finally Medical Officer Gila, a draconian whose idea of bedside manner was telling patients exactly how they were going to die, in precise medical detail, with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Her scaled green skin and razor-sharp teeth made her smile particularly unsettling, especially when she was genuinely trying to be comforting. So there Jake was doing routine maintenance on the exterior hull when Murphy's Law decided to throw a cosmic tantrum. A faulty airlock seal, a pressurization malfunction, and one very surprised human later, Jake found himself shooting through space in an emergency escape pod, watching Mercy's End shrink to a distant speck. Well, Jake muttered to himself as the pod's autopilot engaged, this is new. The pod's navigation system, clearly designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor, locked onto the nearest habitable planet. That planet happened to be Xerion 7, which had 2 important characteristics. It was completely off-limits to galactic traffic, and it was home to the Shadow Maw, widely regarded as the galaxy's most terrifying apex predator. Back on Mercy's End, the crew was having what could generously be called a controlled panic. The human has been ejected into the void of space. Captain Vorthak announced dramatically, his arms spread wide, as if addressing an invisible audience. Surely this is the most tragic fate that could befall our humble maintenance worker. Actually, sir, Clixon's voice flickered with his skin, the pod's heading for Xerion 7. The bridge fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems and Gila's distinctly unimpressed snort. Oh, she said dryly, that's much worse. Jake's pod hit Xerion 7's surface with all the grace of a drunk asteroid, carving a respectable groove through what looked like purple grass before coming to rest against a cluster of crystalline trees. The good news was that the planet's atmosphere was breathable. The bad news was that Jake was about to find out exactly why nobody visited this particular tourist destination. He crawled out of the smoking wreckage, took a deep breath of alien air that tasted faintly of cinnamon and regret, and immediately froze. About 50 yards away, something was watching him from the tree line. Something big. Something with eyes that glowed like golden headlights and teeth that could probably open cans from orbit. The Shadow Maw stepped into the clearing, and Jake's brain helpfully supplied him with every terrifying detail the galactic databases had recorded. 12 feet of midnight black fur rippling over muscles that could crush starship hulls, claws that could slice through battle armor like tissue paper, a jaw that could bite a hovercar in half. And those eyes, intelligent, predatory eyes that were currently studying Jake like he was an interesting new species of snack food. Okay, Jake said aloud, because talking to himself had gotten him through worse situations, like tax audits and first dates. This is fine. This is totally fine. I'm just having a casual encounter with the galaxy's most feared apex predator. No big deal. The Shadow Maw tilted its massive head to one side, ears perking up at the sound of Jake's voice. Instead of the bone-chilling roar Jake expected, the creature made a sound that was distinctly curious, like a house cat encountering a new toy, if house cats were the size of shuttlecraft and could disembowel you with a sneeze. Jake continued. Mostly because stopping seemed like a bad idea. Nice murder beast. Good galaxy-terrorizing monster. The Shadow Maw took a step closer, and Jake's survival instincts finally kicked in. Unfortunately, Jake's survival instincts had always been somewhat defective. Instead of running, screaming, or playing dead like any reasonable person, Jake found himself crouching down and extending his hand. Come here, big guy, he heard himself saying, as if he was calling his neighbor's golden retriever instead of greeting his own imminent death. You're just a big scary puppy, aren't you? Meanwhile, back on Mercy's End, The crew was monitoring the situation with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for watching shuttlecraft accidents in slow motion. The human appears to be talking to the Shadow Maw, Clixon reported, his entire body now flickering like a broken hologram. Should we record this for posterity? Future xenobiologists might want to study the last moments of human stupidity. Wait, Gila said, leaning closer to her scanner readings. The predator's not attacking, its stress hormones are actually decreasing. Captain Vorthak struck a dramatic pose. Perhaps the beast is simply savoring the moment before it devours our poor doomed maintenance worker. Down on the planet's surface, the Shadow Maw had approached close enough that Jake could smell its breath, which surprisingly wasn't the rotting meat scent he'd expected, but something more like ozone and pine needles. The creature lowered its massive head until it was level with Jake's, those golden eyes studying him with an intensity that made Jake feel like he was being X-rayed. Then, completely without warning, the Shadow Maw made a sound that no apex predator in the history of the galaxy should ever make. It purred, a deep rumbling purr that vibrated through Jake's chest and made the ground under his feet buzz gently. Well, Jake said, reaching out to very carefully touch the creature's snout, this is unexpected. The Shadow Maw closed its eyes and leaned into the touch, purring even louder. Jake, operating on pure instinct and the kind of logic that only made sense to humans, began scratching behind the creature's ears. Good boy, he murmured. Who's a good boy? You are. Yes, you are. On Mercy's end, the crew stared at their monitors in stunned silence. Did the human just... Clixon began. Pet the Shadow Maw. Gila finished. Yes, he did. Captain Vorthak threw his hands up in despair. The universe has gone completely mad. 3 hours later, Jake had named the Shadow Maw Buddy, and was beginning to suspect that galactic xenobiologists might have gotten a few things wrong about apex predators. Either that, or he'd suffered some kind of brain damage in the crash and was hallucinating his final moments as a pleasant afternoon with a gigantic space dog. Sit, Jake said, pointing at the ground. Buddy, all 12 feet and several tons of him, promptly sat. His tail, which was roughly the size of a telephone pole, wagged once and carved a small trench in the purple grass. Good boy, now, stay. Jake walked 20 feet away. Buddy remained perfectly still, watching him with those intelligent golden eyes. When Jake held up his hand and said okay, Buddy bounded over with the enthusiasm of a puppy. If puppies could accidentally knock down trees when they got excited. The crew of Mercy's End had been watching this display with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or reality television. Day 2 of observation, Gila reported in her deadpan medical tone. The human has apparently domesticated the galaxy's most feared predator using techniques typically reserved for training household pets. I'm beginning to question everything I learned in xenobiology school. Maybe, Clixon suggested, his flickering now down to a nervous strobe, maybe the Shadow Maw is just playing with its food. For 6 hours. Gila raised one scaled eyebrow. That would be the most patient predator in galactic history. Down on Xerion 7, Jake was discovering that having a giant alien death machine as a pet came with some unexpected perks. Buddy had apparently decided that Jake needed protecting, which meant bringing him food. Unfortunately, Buddy's idea of appropriate human food ran toward things I just killed with my bare claws. Thanks, Buddy, Jake said, examining what appeared to be some kind of six-legged space rabbit. But I'm not really equipped to eat raw, whatever this is. Buddy tilted his head, then picked up the creature and breathed on it. Jake discovered that Shadow Maws apparently had some kind of internal flame capability, because the space rabbit was now perfectly cooked. Okay, that's actually pretty useful, Jake admitted, taking a tentative bite. It tasted like chicken, if chicken had been marinated in starlight and good intentions. Meanwhile, Jake had fashioned a signal beacon from parts of his crashed pod, sending out a distress call that the crew was definitely receiving but apparently not in any hurry to answer. The human is trying to contact us. Clixon reported. I can see that, Captain Vorthak said dramatically. But how can we possibly mount a rescue when he is guarded by the most terrible beast in the known galaxy? The terrible beast is currently letting him use its belly as a pillow, Gila observed. I don't think it's going to be much of an obstacle. Jake had indeed discovered that Buddy made an excellent pillow, if you didn't mind the fact that your pillow occasionally got up to hunt small animals and breathe fire. The creature seemed genuinely concerned about Jake's comfort, bringing him soft moss to sleep on and positioning himself to block the wind. You know what, Buddy, Jake said, scratching behind the creature's ears as they settled in for their second night together. I don't know what those alien databases were talking about. You're just a big softy, aren't you? Buddy purred, A sound that made the ground vibrate and probably registered on seismic equipment halfway across the planet. Of course, Jake continued. I should probably figure out how to get home eventually. I mean, I like camping as much as the next guy, but I'm pretty sure my boss is going to dock my pay for taking an unauthorized vacation. As if sensing Jake's mood, Buddy raised his massive head and looked toward the sky, where Mercy's End was visible as a tiny moving star. He made a questioning sound, almost like he was asking what Jake was looking at. That's my ride, Jake explained, pointing. Well, it was my ride. Now it's my ride, that's probably trying to figure out how to explain to corporate that they lost an employee to the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Back on the ship, Gila was running continuous scans and coming to conclusions that made her question her entire understanding of xenobiology. Captain, she said, her voice as dry as ever, I'm reading some interesting data down there. Oh, Vorthak struck a listening pose, hand cupped to his ear. The Shadow Maw's stress hormones are at the lowest levels I've ever recorded for the species. Its brain activity suggests it's content, possibly even happy, and the human, also happy. Remarkably so, considering he's stranded on a death world with a creature that could eat him as a light snack. Clixon's flickering intensified. So we have a happy human and a happy apex predator. This can't be normal. Nothing about this situation is normal. Gila replied. But I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, we've been looking at Shadow Maws all wrong. After 48 hours of watching Jake play interstellar dog trainer with the galaxy's most notorious apex predator, Captain Vorthak finally reached his dramatic breaking point. Not because he was particularly concerned about Jake's welfare, mind you, but because the paperwork involved in losing a crew member to a Shadow Maw would probably take longer to fill out than his remaining natural lifespan. We must mount a rescue, he declared, striking what he probably thought was a heroic pose but looked more like someone trying to hail a taxi in a thunderstorm. I cannot bear the thought of explaining to Galactic Resources that we abandoned our maintenance worker to become a chew toy. Technically, Gila pointed out with her usual cheerful pessimism, we didn't abandon him. Physics abandoned him, we just failed to catch him. The distinction will be lost on the bureaucrats. Vorthak replied grimly. Clixon, who had been flickering at roughly the frequency of a dying fluorescent bulb for the past 2 days, finally voiced what they were all thinking. But sir, how exactly do we rescue someone from a Shadow Maw? The standard protocol is to nuke the site from orbit and file a death certificate. We shall use cunning, Vorthak announced. And possibly sedatives, many sedatives. The plan they eventually settled on was what military strategists would generously call optimistically suicidal. They would land the shuttle as close to Jake's position as possible, deploy a portable shield generator, and hope that they could grab Jake and run before Buddy decided they looked like convenient snack foods. This is the stupidest plan in the history of stupid plans, Gila observed as they descended through Xerion 7's atmosphere. I should probably prepare 3 death certificates instead of 1. Your confidence is inspiring, Clixon muttered, his entire body now strobing like a disco ball having a seizure. They set down about 200 yards from Jake's makeshift campsite, which had evolved over the past few days into something resembling a cozy outdoor living room. If outdoor living rooms typically featured 12-foot-tall alien predators as furniture, Jake was sitting against Buddy's side, apparently showing the creature something on his salvaged communicator screen. Buddy was paying attention with the focused intensity of a student cramming for finals, occasionally making interested noises that sounded disturbingly like questions. Is the human teaching the Shadow Maw to read? Clixon whispered as they crept closer, portable shield generator humming ominously between them. It certainly looks that way, Gila replied. Though I suspect the creature's literacy skills are the least of our concerns right now. They were about 50 yards away when Buddy's head snapped up, golden eyes locking onto them with laser precision. The creature rose to its full height in one fluid motion, and suddenly the rescue team remembered exactly why Shadow Maws had their terrifying reputation. Jake, Captain Vorthak called out in his most dramatically heroic voice. Fear not, we have come to rescue you from your terrible fate. Jake looked up from his communicator, saw the 3 aliens crouched behind their shield generator like it was going to protect them from a creature that could probably punt a starship, and sighed. Guys, he called back, this really isn't necessary. Buddy's not going to hurt anybody. Buddy, Gila repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. Yeah, that's his name. Say hi, Buddy. The Shadow Maw, apparently responding to his name, sat down and made a sound that was probably meant to be friendly but came out like a freight train having an argument with a thunderstorm. The rescue team's shield generator immediately overloaded and shut down with a pathetic wheeze. Oh good, Clixon whispered. Now we're defenseless. We were always defenseless. Gila pointed out. The shield was just making us feel better about it. Jake stood up and walked toward them, completely oblivious to the fact that Buddy was following about 3 feet behind him like the galaxy's most overqualified bodyguard. Look. I appreciate you coming down here, Jake said. But really everything's fine. Buddy's actually pretty great company. He's house-trained, he can cook, and he's an excellent listener. Plus he does this thing where he purrs and it's incredibly relaxing. As if on cue, Buddy began purring, a sound that made the ground vibrate and caused several small rocks to dance around their feet. Captain Vorthak stared at the scene before him with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was being systematically demolished by a maintenance worker and his pet death machine. Jake, he said carefully, that creature could kill you with a sneeze. Probably, Jake agreed cheerfully. But he won't, will you, Buddy? Buddy made what was clearly a negative sound, then demonstrated his affection by gently headbutting Jake with enough force to knock over a small building. Jake just laughed and scratched behind the creature's ears. You see, Jake said. Perfect, gentleman. To prove Jake's point, Buddy noticed that Clixon was trembling rather violently and apparently decided this meant the engineer needed comforting. He approached the terrified alien with obvious good intentions, lowering his massive head to nuzzle Clixon gently. Clixon, faced with several tons of apex predator trying to offer comfort, did what any reasonable being would do in that situation. He fainted, his body going completely transparent as he hit the ground. Oh, that's not good, Jake said, hurrying over to check on the unconscious engineer. Buddy, I think you scared him. Buddy looked genuinely distressed by this development, making worried sounds and attempting to use his massive tongue to revive Clixon, which was probably not helping the situation. Gila, meanwhile, was scanning both Jake and Buddy with her medical tricorder, her expression growing more puzzled by the second. This is impossible, she muttered. The creature's stress hormones are completely normal. Actually, they're better than normal. And Jake shows no signs of fear, trauma, or impending death. If anything, he seems healthier than when he left the ship. Maybe, Jake suggested, Shadowmaws aren't actually the terrifying monsters everyone thinks they are. Maybe they're just misunderstood. As if to demonstrate this point, Buddy very gently picked up the unconscious Clixon in his jaws and placed him in a more comfortable position, then breathed warm air over him until the engineer began to stir. Captain Vorthak watched this display of tender care from a creature that was supposed to be the galaxy's most efficient killing machine, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the universe. By the 7 moons of Zolonia, he whispered, what have we done? Gila had been running continuous scans for the better part of an hour, her medical tricorder beeping with increasing frequency as it processed data that should have been impossible. Finally, she looked up with the expression of someone who had just discovered that everything she'd learned in medical school was apparently an elaborate practical joke. I need to run this by you all, she said in her characteristic deadpan, because either my equipment is malfunctioning or we've made the most significant xenobiological discovery in galactic history. Please tell me it's the equipment, Clixon mumbled from where he was sitting on the ground, still recovering from his close encounter with Buddy's enthusiastic affection. It's not the equipment. Gila consulted her readings again, as if hoping they might change if she glared at them hard enough. According to my scans, Shadowmaws aren't apex predators at all, they're pack animals. Highly intelligent, emotionally complex pack animals with sophisticated social structures. Captain Vorthak struck a pose of profound confusion. But the reports. The terror. The complete devastation of the research station on Kepler-7. Yeah, about that. Gila continued, her voice getting drier by the minute. I've been cross-referencing the incident reports with my current readings. Want to know what I think happened on Kepler-7? Nobody answered, mostly because they were afraid of what she might say. The research team landed on a Shadowmaw world, and immediately started treating the local population like dangerous animals. They set up containment fields, fired warning shots, used sonic deterrents. Basically, they did everything possible to convince a pack of intelligent creatures that they were hostile invaders. Jake, who had been listening while absently scratching Buddy behind the ears, suddenly looked up. So the Shadowmaws were just defending their territory. Defending their families, more likely. Gila confirmed. These creatures form complex social bonds. The research team probably landed right in the middle of someone's neighborhood and started acting like they owned the place. Buddy, as if sensing that he was the topic of conversation, made a questioning sound and nuzzled Jake's shoulder. Jake responded by pulling up something on his communicator screen and showing it to the creature, who studied it with obvious interest. What are you showing him? Captain Vorthak asked, his dramatic tendencies temporarily overwhelmed by curiosity. Pictures of Earth dogs, Jake replied casually. He seems fascinated by the concept of different breeds. I think he's trying to figure out why some dogs are tiny, and others are huge, but they're all the same species. Clixon, still flickering nervously, raised a shaking hand. Are we just going to ignore the fact that the human is having an interspecies cultural exchange with a creature that's supposed to eat him? That's the thing, Gila said, consulting her tricorder again. I don't think shadowmaws are designed to hunt humanoid species at all. Their dietary preferences lean toward large herbivores and energy-rich plant matter. They probably wouldn't even consider us food under normal circumstances. Then why, Captain Vorthak demanded, his voice rising to dramatic heights, does the galaxy live in terror of these magnificent beasts? Because, Jake said quietly, still focused on his conversation with Buddy, nobody ever tried talking to them before. Everyone just assumed they were monsters and acted accordingly. As if to demonstrate this point, Buddy suddenly perked up and made a series of complex vocalizations toward the forest. Jake looked up, following the creature's gaze, and his eyes widened. Guys, he said. I think we're about to have company. The tree line rustled, and then the forest began disgorging shadowmaws. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, ranging from creatures even larger than Buddy to smaller ones that were probably juveniles. They emerged with the fluid grace of their species, but there was nothing threatening about their approach. If anything, they seemed curious. Clixon's entire body went transparent with terror. We're going to die. We're all going to die. I should have listened to my mother and gone into accounting. Actually, Gila said, her voice filled with scientific fascination. I don't think they're here to hunt us. Look at their body language. She was right. The approaching shadowmaws weren't stalking or prowling. They were walking normally, their golden eyes bright with curiosity rather than predatory intent. Several of the smaller ones were actually play-fighting with each other as they approached, tumbling through the purple grass like oversized puppies. Buddy called them over, Jake realized. He's introducing us to his family. The lead shadowmaw, even larger than Buddy and bearing scars that spoke of age and experience, approached the group with regal dignity. It stopped directly in front of Jake, and studied him with the same intense curiosity that Buddy had shown during their first meeting. Jake, operating on the same insane logic that had gotten him this far, extended his hand toward the massive creature. Hello there, he said politely. I'm Jake. Nice to meet you. The elder shadowmaw sniffed Jake's hand, then made a sound that was unmistakably approving. It turned to Buddy, and made a series of complex vocalizations that sounded distinctly like a conversation. They're talking, Gila breathed, her scientific mind racing. They have language. Complex, nuanced language. What are they saying? Captain Vorthak whispered, apparently afraid that speaking too loudly might break the spell. Jake tilted his head, listening intently to the exchange between Buddy and the elder. I think Buddy's explaining how we met. And the older one is asking questions about us. The conversation continued for several minutes, with other shadowmaws occasionally joining in. Jake found himself in the surreal position of being the subject of what was clearly a detailed discussion among creatures that the galaxy considered mindless killing machines. Finally, the elder shadowmaw turned back to Jake, and made a sound that was unmistakably welcoming. Then it did something that made Clixon faint again, and caused Captain Vorthak to question everything he'd ever believed about the universe. It bowed. Not a casual nod, but a deep formal bow that spoke of respect and recognition. The other shadowmaws followed suit, creating a scene that would have been magnificent if it weren't so completely impossible. They're acknowledging him, Gila said, her voice filled with wonder. They're recognizing Jake as what? A leader? An alpha? Jake, faced with several dozen massive predators showing him formal respect, did what any reasonable human would do in that situation. He bowed back. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The shadowmaws began making sounds that could only be described as pleased, and several of the younger ones approached Jake with the obvious intention of getting their own ear scratches. Oh no, Gila said suddenly, her scientific excitement giving way to a more practical concern. What? Captain Vorthak asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. If these creatures have accepted Jake as their pack leader, she trailed off, running calculations on her tricorder. What does that mean? Clixon asked weakly from the ground. Gila looked up from her device with an expression of scientific fascination mixed with bureaucratic horror. It means, she said slowly, that we now have a human who commands the loyalty of an entire shadowmaw pack. And based on the pheromone readings I'm getting, I think more packs are coming to investigate. As if summoned by her words, more movement became visible in the distant tree line, and then more. The forest around them was beginning to stir with the approach of what looked like every shadowmaw on the planet. Jake, oblivious to the galaxy-shaking implications of his situation, was busy trying to pet 3 different shadowmaws at once while Buddy looked on with obvious pride. Well, Captain Vorthak said faintly, This is going to require some very creative paperwork. 3 weeks later, Jake Martinez found himself in the most surreal job interview of his career, sitting across from Director Calaxis of the Galactic Wildlife Preservation Council, while Buddy lounged beside his chair like the galaxy's most intimidating emotional support animal. "So Mr. Martinez," Director Calaxis said, his multiple eyes darting nervously between Jake and the massive Shadow Maw who was currently using his tail to swat at a holographic fly, "you're telling me that you've somehow become the, what did you call it? The alpha of an entire planetary population of Shadow Maws." "Pack leader," Jake corrected, scratching Buddy behind the ears. "And it's not just one planet anymore. Word travels fast in Shadow Maw social networks apparently. Last count was, what, 17 different worlds?" Director Calaxis's primary eye twitched. 17 worlds. Of creatures we've classified as the galaxy's most dangerous apex predators. Former classification, Gila interjected from her position near the door, where she was keeping one eye on her medical scanner and another on the 3 junior Shadow Maws who had insisted on accompanying Jake to the meeting. Current classification is highly intelligent social species with complex pack dynamics and an unfortunate history of first contact incidents. The meeting was taking place aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, which had been hastily retrofitted with reinforced floors after the first Shadow Maw delegation had accidentally put their collective foot through the deck plating. The conference room now looked like a cross between a United Nations assembly and a very exclusive pet daycare center. Captain Vorthak, resplendent in his best dress uniform, was documenting everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had realized that his maintenance worker's bizarre adventure was going to make him the most famous starship captain in the quadrant. "The implications are staggering," he declared, striking a pose that probably looked heroic in his mind, but came across more like a statue commemorating dramatic overreaction. "First contact with an entire civilization that we've completely misunderstood for centuries. It's not really first contact," Jake pointed out. "It's more like, first polite conversation. We've been having contact for years. We've just been really bad at it." Clixon, who had stopped flickering quite so violently once he realized that the Shadow Maws were more interested in getting belly rubs than eating him, raised a tentative hand. "What I don't understand is why they accepted Jake so quickly. What makes him special?" Jake shrugged. "I talked to Buddy like he was intelligent instead of treating him like a monster. Apparently, that was revolutionary thinking. But surely there's more to it than that." Director Calaxis pressed. "Our xenopsychologists have been studying the recordings of your initial encounter. There must be some specific human trait that appeals to Shadow Maw social dynamics." Buddy, who had been following the conversation with obvious interest, suddenly made a series of complex vocalizations. Jake listened intently, then grinned. "He says it's because I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. Shadow Maw pack leaders are chosen based on their ability to show strength without aggression, and to put the pack's needs before their own. When I approached him with my hand extended, I was showing trust and offering care, not trying to dominate or control. So the secret to communicating with the galaxy's most feared predators," Gila said dryly, "is basic empathy and decent social skills." "Pretty much," Jake agreed. "Also it helps if you're good at ear scratches. They really like ear scratches." As if to demonstrate this point, one of the junior Shadow Maws approached Director Calaxis hopefully. The director, to his credit, tentatively reached out and attempted to scratch behind the creature's ears. The Shadow Maw's immediate purr of contentment was so loud that it rattled the conference table. "Remarkable," Director Calaxis murmured, his nervousness giving way to wonder. "Absolutely remarkable. The question now," Captain Vorthak announced dramatically, "is what we do with this unprecedented situation. We have a human who commands the loyalty of creatures from 17 different worlds. The political implications alone are staggering." "Actually," Jake said, "I've been thinking about that. The Shadow Maws don't want to conquer anything or get involved in galactic politics. They just want to be left alone to live their lives without being shot at by research teams or hunted by trophy collectors." "But surely," Director Calaxis said, "there must be some way to formalize this relationship. The Council is prepared to offer you a position as official Shadow Maw ambassador, with full diplomatic status and a salary that reflects the unique nature of your qualifications." Jake considered this, absently petting the junior Shadow Maw who had decided his lap looked comfortable. "What would that involve exactly?" "Primarily serving as a liaison between Shadow Maw communities and the galactic government, helping to establish proper protocols for future contact. Maybe writing a manual on interspecies communication that doesn't result in property damage and casualties." "I could do that," Jake said thoughtfully, "but I have some conditions." "Name them." "First, Buddy comes with me wherever I go. Non-negotiable." Buddy, hearing his name, raised his massive head and made a sound of agreement that rattled the windows. "Second, Any research or contact with Shadowmaw communities has to be approved by them first. No more surprise visits from scientists who think they're studying animals. Reasonable, Director Calaxis agreed. Third, I want Captain Vorthak, Clixon and Gila assigned as my permanent support team. They're the ones who actually came back for me, and they understand the situation better than anyone else. Captain Vorthak puffed up with pride. It would be my honor to serve as part of the first official Shadowmaw diplomatic mission. Clixon flickered briefly, then steadied. I suppose it beats regular maintenance work. At least the Shadowmaws don't try to electrocute me when I'm not looking. And finally, Jake continued. I want it clearly stated in my job description that I am not responsible for any property damage caused by Shadowmaws who get overexcited and accidentally knock things over. Because that's going to happen. A lot. As if summoned by his words, a deep rumble echoed through the ship's hull, followed by what sounded like several tons of enthusiastic aliens settling down for a nap in the cargo bay. That would be the rest of the delegation, Jake explained casually. They get restless when meetings go on too long. Director Calaxis looked like he was developing a headache. How many Shadowmaws are currently aboard this vessel? Only about 30, Jake said. I convinced the others to wait on the planet. They wanted to come too, but I figured that might be overwhelming. 30, Director Calaxis repeated weakly. Don't worry, Jake assured him. They're all house-trained, mostly. Another rumble echoed through the ship. This one distinctly more apologetic in tone. I should probably go check on them, Jake said, standing up. Diplomatic meetings make them nervous, and when they get nervous, they tend to, well, let's just say the janitorial staff is going to need a raise. As Jake headed for the door, followed by his loyal entourage of massive predators, Director Calaxis called after him. Mr. Martinez, one more question. Do you have any idea how this is going to change everything we thought we knew about interspecies relations? Jake paused at the doorway and grinned. Director, 3 weeks ago I was a maintenance worker, whose biggest concern was whether the coffee machine in the break room was going to work. Now I'm apparently the galaxy's first Shadowmaw whisperer, and my best friend is a 12-foot-tall alien who can breathe fire and gives the best hugs in the known universe. Buddy made a pleased sound at being called Jake's best friend. The way I see it, Jake continued. If a random human with no special training can accidentally become the pack leader of the galaxy's most misunderstood species just by being decent to them, then maybe the problem isn't that the universe is too weird to understand. Maybe the problem is that we keep trying to shoot first and ask questions later. He scratched Buddy behind the ears one more time. Come on, boy, let's go make sure your cousins haven't eaten the furniture. As they left, Director Calaxis slumped in his chair and looked at the remaining crew members of Mercy's End. Is it just me, he asked, or does this feel like the beginning of something much bigger than a simple diplomatic appointment? Captain Vorthak struck his final dramatic pose of the day. My friend, I believe we have just witnessed the dawn of a new era in galactic relations. An era where the most feared creatures in the universe follow a human maintenance worker around like oversized puppies. And somehow, that makes perfect sense. Gila's medical scanner beeped with an incoming message. She glanced at it and smirked. What is it? Clixon asked. Message from Jake. Apparently, the Shadowmaws have questions about Earth cats. They want to know if it's normal for small predators to knock things off tables for no apparent reason. Captain Vorthak threw his hands up in theatrical despair. The universe has gone completely mad, and I couldn't be happier about it. Outside the conference room, the sound of Jake's laughter mixed with the contented purring of 30 Shadowmaws, creating a harmony that no one in the galaxy had ever heard before, but which somehow sounded exactly right. After all, in a universe full of wonders and terrors, sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply treating someone with kindness and seeing what happens next. And if what happens next involves accidentally becoming the pack leader of the galaxy's most misunderstood species, well, that's just Tuesday for humans. Because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's finding the universe's most dangerous creatures and somehow convincing them to be friends. It's a gift, really. A weird, inexplicable, occasionally property-damaging gift, but a gift nonetheless.